Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Chee-Tash. My name is Chris, and today we're going to be continuing along through the book Eloquent JavaScript, talking about JavaScript, the language, development, etc. I know it's been a while, but I want to go back to this book because I know I get a lot of requests for it, and I do appreciate everybody listening to the previous videos on the chapters that we've done from this book, Eloquent JavaScript by Marjan Haverbeek. And today we're going to be continuing to go through Chapter 8, Bugs and Errors, today talking about exceptions. So without further ado, we're going to continue with the first slide. It's going to be a very short presentation because I'm going to switch over to my Visual Studio IDE, and I'm going to show you an example that I did in just a very basic Node application of how you can use try catch statements and how you can throw errors. And maybe some of you are wondering what that even is, but without further ado, let's talk about it. So, what to do when a function can't proceed? So, an exception is basically a way for a program to throw an error. Now, when that happens, everything pretty much kind of just stops. The normal functionality and the normal processing that happens when functions run, when your program runs, when an error gets thrown into the mix, an exception happens, well, then everything just stops. So you need kind of a way to make it so things don't just abruptly stop, and then you can give your users accurate and prompt feedback on what they need to do, whether that's, hey, can you retry again? Hey, this happened because you did this, please retry again, etc. Or, hey, this is down, please try again later. You need to handle it in a certain fashion so as to give a pretty good user experience. So that's where exception handling comes into place. It's basically where you stop and then you jump to a place where you handle that certain exception scenario. So when exceptions are raised, and again, exceptions are ways to make it possible for code to raise or throw an error. That's kind of what Marjan writes in this section of the book. So when an exception is raised, the process jumps out of the current function and it goes all the way down to the first call where that function originated. So if an exception happened in the, I don't know, print request function, but that was called by your make post function, it's going to jump all the way back to that, back to like the original calling method. It's going to go through actually what is called the call stack. And I think we've talked about this in other JavaScript videos. This is called unwinding the stack. So you're unwinding the stack. You're unwinding all the other functions that have been called up to that point to go to the original function that kind of started it all. And like what I said in that bullet point there, you can have it sprint all the way down your stack. So this is normally what happens when an error occurs in your app, but you can have a stopgap in place that allows you to handle that error properly so that it doesn't just sprint all the way up the stack. It prints you this huge call stack and you're going through your logs and you're wondering, what the heck happened? This is where catching an exception comes into play. And catching an exception is part of a try-catch statement. So try and catch are keywords in JavaScript. So you can wrap things in a try block with curly braces and a catch block in curly braces. It kind of actually looks like like an if-else statement, basically. So you're going to try something, and then if an error pops up within that try block, it'll get caught in the catch block. And then from there, you can handle it in a proper way for your users or for your application, whether that's, hey, correctly logging it, and then maybe you still return something, or maybe you have you return a 500 error instead of a 200 saying that everything's okay, etc., etc. But it allows you to better able to handle these exception scenarios that come up in your application. So if no error or no exception happens in the try block, then the program just proceeds as normally as it should. So try catches are very useful. There are some things that to consider with try catch blocks. Namely, one thing that I can think of is with naming variables. So when you declare something within a try block, it's like its own little environment. It's its own little scope, I think is a better way to put it. So if you have a variable in that try block, you can't use it outside the try block. So you have to be cognizant of that. You have to declare it outside of that in order to be able to use it within that. It's kind of like the same thing if you set up a for loop, like basically a for I loop, and you have your initial variable, usually it's an I. You can't use that I outside of that for loop. It's within that own little scope. So how does this look in practice? Well, let me pull up, and hopefully you guys can see this. I wonder, is there a way for me? Yes, okay. Hopefully that just made it bigger for you guys. So here's kind of an example of, just a very simple example of how I use this. So here I have a Node application. I won't go into all the details here of a Node application. I'm not the world's leading expert in Node, but I just set this up, something very simple, just a few simple endpoints that we can test. I'm running an Express server. So Express, this is like a framework for creating routes that can take in get, post, delete requests, patch, all those typical HTTP requests, and then return data from that. So if me coming from Java world, this is kind of an alternative to Spring Boot. We can have this Node Express server connected to a database. We can then have it serve data from our database, etc. And basically, I have this running on my port. Let me run it. npm run start. So I have this running on my port, right? I have my imports here. I'm bringing in, I have one controller, if you guys see here, testing.js, which is here. I have a couple Git endpoints here. So I can do Git requests to these. We have /test, we have /another test. I'm importing this into my server.js. And then from here, I can access those endpoints. So how would I do that? If you had a UI, you can have it connected from, like button clicks or when going to certain pages. But here I can use Postman. So if I do testing/test person Chris, yes. So this is working. What was the other one I had? Was it just testing? No, was it just /? Yes, okay. So you can see here / is like the main endpoint, the main maybe like entry point here. I don't want to say it's like your home page because this isn't like I'm running a UI, it's like I'm running a backend, but here this is just the basic Git endpoint that I can hit that just prints out, hello world. For everything in my testing controller, we're going to have to prefix it with this /testing, and then from there the route within my testing controller. So if I want to go to /test, well then, like you guys probably saw here, I have to have /testing/test, and I can return something from here. Now, okay. Now what happens, where does the error handling come in? If we take a look here, we have in our test endpoint, it's taking in a request and it's going to send out a response. And then I'll show you guys what I'm doing down here next. But in the request, I'm checking if the request.body.test is equal to null. So in this request, am I setting a request body? If I'm sending it, is the test field on the request body equal to null? If it is, we're going to throw this new error. So you can throw errors and then catch them elsewhere. Now you might be asking yourself, well, there's no try catch here. And you would be correct. Because of that, I do have a middleware, which is this error handler. Now this error handler is where I'm going to not necessarily catch, but where I'm going to handle the error. So if I don't have this test field, I'm going to come here and I'm basically going to default this concatenated name, and I'm going to return the name. Instead of returning an error, I'm going to return that. I'm going to return just this, and that's what you get here. In the console, you get person Chris, just a string person Chris. It doesn't really make a lot of sense because this error handler is really meant to handle the other endpoint, but just to show you guys here that when you throw this error, it will still get caught in my middleware, because this middleware, which is again taking in the request and the response, but it has this new field of error, and then this next field, which I can keep on propagating this request to like the next middleware in the chain, etc. But here, I'm not using the error object. If you did use the error object, I'm betting that you would probably get the error log. So if I did this, let's save it. Let's restart my server. And now let's try the same endpoint again. Person Chris. Yep, that still looks good. But here, it's actually, okay, so that error object that it's getting is returning the actual message that I'm throwing here. Do you see here, no test field present? So if you had like some sort of logger, if you're logging this out to somewhere where you're collecting it, then you can see, oh, no test field is present. Cool. So how do you get around that? Well, test, if I now send a request body with the test field here, think about it like this. This is the key value pair. This is a JSON. So now what happens if I send this? Well, now I'm actually getting back my request. It's just basically just echoing that. So this is not null, so it's not going to throw it. So we're just going to return it to the user. Very cool. I have another endpoint here, / another test. And I apologize for these names. I know it's not probably the greatest naming conventions, but I just wanted something very, very basic. Here, if you notice, I do something a little bit differently. Here I have the try catch block. So anything within this try block that throws an error, it's going to go down to the catch. It's going to log out some sort of statement that's going to tell you, okay, there's an error in the GET request to another / another test. And then here I propagate that error to my error handler middleware, which again, I'm exporting this, right? I'm exporting the client error handler. I'm importing it into my server.js, and then I use it here. It's usually you have it at the very end, so I don't think it gets mixed up. But the order here does matter, but you want this at the very end just so I don't think that things don't get conflicted or the error handler isn't called too early in your call stack. So you have it to the end. So when you have this next parameter, the next parameter as part of express is going to then propagate this error to the next middleware that's in between another test and your server, basically. So it will come here. So that's what I want to do. That for me is a better experience for my user. Yes, over here it's kind of doing that, but here explicitly I can throw this error, customized error, and then I can handle it. I can deliberately throw it to my error handler in that catch block, and then from here I can handle it any which way I want. So again, if an error is thrown within this try block, it will get caught in the catch block. And then from here, you can handle it however way you want. So if I call another test, right? Let's say I call another test without a request body. What's going to happen? Okay, so it's printing out person Chris. Does that make sense? Let's see. So here, console.log, we've got our request. That's this. It's coming back empty. Okay, if you see here in my try block, I am looking at this, and I have this function here that's going to check if the name field on the request body is populated. So I'm passing in the request.body.name. So we're going to come down here. I guess I don't really need that variable. We can not include that. And I'm just doing a simple check here. Return if name does not equal null. In the case that we're talking about here, name is null. So this is going to return false. Since that returned false, we're going into the else block, and then this is where I'm throwing the new error. It's going to log that out, name not included in request. This is going to get thrown, which means we're coming down here to the catch. Now in the catch, it's going to log this error and get request to another test. That's here. We're going to go next. This is where it's going to propagate again to the error handler, to my middleware. It's going to come here. I'm logging the error. So again, that's here, logging the error, name not included in the request. And again, that's just the same message from the error constructor here, the string param and the error constructor. So we're logging that, which is here. And then we're also logging inside error handler, just another simple log. And again, we're showing that the request.body is empty, which is what's showing there. We're going to default the name to just person Chris. And then we're going to return this 201 status. We're going to send the string back to the user. And that's what's happening there. So even if the user sends a bad request, you can still proceed forward and give the user some sort of viable feedback to you. That's the power of using try-catch statements. And in this example, I coupled it with middleware just due to the whole environment of being in this Node application. But besides that point, the real big thing here is this try-catch. This is what's going to allow us to better handle that scenario. And to prove this point too, if I do end up sending a name field, let's say name Brian, what am I going to get back? Am I going to get back person Chris? No. I'm getting back person Brian, because I included the name variable. So in this try catch, we're checking if name is present. And guess what? Name is present. Name is present. So this will be true. We're going to concat this to that person string, and we're going to send that back to the user. So we're not getting person Chris. Person Chris is what's defaulted if you send bad data into this HTTP endpoint. But because you included something good, the field that we want, a proper request body, we're just going to echo that right back to you. So that, again, is a very, very good way to handle errors and exception scenarios in JavaScript. I'm using those two as the same, exceptions and errors. I don't know if they're exactly the same. When I think of exceptions, I think of in Java we have exceptions because we have a bunch of different types of exceptions. In JavaScript, you really kind of don't. You can throw these errors, but they're not really unique, and they can't really tell you whether it's like a null pointer or if it's in like an index out of bounds, like what we have in Java. So I'm using those two as the same, exception and error. Let me know if they are in fact two different things, and hopefully I'm not getting anybody confused out there that I'm using those two interchangeably, but that is what try catch looks like in a nutshell. So that's going to do it, guys. Yeah, thank you very much for listening. Hopefully I'll try to continue on with some more JavaScript-like videos. Hopefully you guys like this live coding example versus just the slides, and maybe we can keep building out this Node application as we continue along this book and get into more and more topics. Might not be a bad idea. But thank you guys very much for listening. My name is Chris. This has been Chee-Tash. Take care, everybody.